Welcome. It is good to have everyone. Excited to see some of you chatting already in the comments. Man, it's good to have you. Welcome to the show this evening. This is going to be a special one. I'm super excited to share our guests with you. But before we get started, just a little bit of a precursor. Do me a favor. Go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe, make sure that you got your notifications on because we have a lot of good content coming down the pipeline. I am super excited about some of the guests that we have lined up, and I'm very excited about this evening. Just so I set you all up for kind of what's going to transpire, we have a short video. It's about 14 minutes that's going to set the conversation up as we get into this discussion. This is actually the very first time that we have had an intentional conversation about plagiarism or literary borrowing or theft, or I don't know what the phrases are that they use nowadays. But I am excited about the conversation. And so without any further ado, do me a favor first, share this video with someone that needs to hear this. Just send it out. Send a quick text message, send a Facebook message, shoot it out to your friends, family, because we are going to have a great one this evening. Let's watch this clip as we get started, and then we'll fire up our guests. Here we go.
And so the Seventh-day Adventist Church decided that they were going to settle this by hiring an outside law firm with private funds, because critics would say, well, your church hired them and they just did what you told them to do. So Warren Johns, who is the chief legal counsel for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, hired a man by the name of Vincent Ramik. Ramik was the senior partner in his law firm. I think it was the Rammer, Diller, and White, W-I-G-H-T, not W-H-I-T-E, law firm, and they specialized in literary law. So it wasn't just like, they wanted somebody who knew their stuff. And they basically went to Ramik and they said, this is what the critics say, this is what we say, here's her writings, pour through them, and tell us, you're honest, what is it going to be? Is she guilty of plagiarism? Could she be charged with it? Now, I've got a rather lengthy section I'm finishing with of an interview after the case, after Ramik had finished the case, 10,000 case hours. He read through portions of many of Ellen White's works. The only book he read cover to cover was the book, The Great Controversy. And incidentally, he was Roman Catholic. Okay, so you put that in the mix. This is what his takeaway was. Can we go to the screen? I started out, I think, basically neutral on the literary charges. I became actually biased against her in the sense that I thought she was what some people, such as her latest critic Walter Rea, had alleged, guilty of plagiarism. It was reading her messages in her writings that changed my mind. And I think there's a distinction, a very salient difference here. I believe that the critics have missed the boat badly by focusing upon Mrs. White's writings instead of focusing upon the messages in Mrs. White's writings. And he goes on to explain, the clauses and the phrases and how all the structure of he said, it was the messages that made the difference for me as I was going through this material.
When I first began to study the idea of Ellen White copying from other authors, I thought there must be some explanation for all of this. So one of the first places I went was to the White Estate's website to see what they had to say. At the White Estate and elsewhere, I found the prime defense of the church was that a copyright attorney had cleared her of the plagiarism charges made by Rea, Canwright, and others. I was taken aback by this because on one hand, I had seen the plagiarism with my own eyes from the original books open before me. But on the other hand, all of the leaders in Adventism were saying that she did not plagiarize. But these are mutually exclusive positions. They cannot both be right. So I wondered how to determine which of these views was correct. After researching and speaking to others, I found many Adventists will simply read the headline that Ellen White was cleared of plagiarism by this attorney and will immediately throw the conclusion in your face and walk away. The summary or conclusion for this report provides the evidence they are searching for with the least amount of effort invested. In effect, they are saying, If an attorney has cleared her, what more is there to say? If you only read the church's opinion, you will always arrive at the same conclusion. You cannot expect to go to the organization that promotes the prophet for unbiased answers to questions that oppose the prophet. It's circular reasoning. Thus, unless you broaden your studies, you cannot evaluate if you have all of the information to make an informed decision. And I believe when you have someone making such extraordinary claims as being the last day prophet to the world, a little more time is warranted to study the origin of her writings. So although this and other videos will be quite long, I pray that it'll be helpful to you on your walk with Christ and to help unravel this debate between whether or not she was a plagiarist. The main topic of this video and the next will be the legal opinion attorney Vincent Ramik, who was hired by the chief attorney of the General Conference, Warren Johns, to defend their prophet Ellen White. This came about after the early 1980s, when the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Newsweek, and Time magazine published that Ellen White had copied large amounts of material from other writers. As I mentioned before, when I began to test Ellen White, the Ramik report was one of the first documents I came across in her defense. So I felt this document was the perfect place to begin my cross-examination. What was plagiarism defined as in the 1800s? We must define our terms first. Certainly in our current time and culture, we all agree with the definition of plagiarism as defined here in 2021 from a few modern dictionaries. Plagiarism, the process or practice of using another person's ideas or work and pretending that it is your own. The practice of taking someone else's work or ideas and passing them off as one's own. To steal and pass off the ideas or words of another as one's own. To use another's production without crediting the source. But the Adventist authorities often say it was different back then, or some variation of that argument. So in order to discuss the subject of plagiarism in the 1800s and the attorney's report, we must begin by reading the definition from the 1800s. Interesting enough, I came across a quote written in 1880 in the Review and Herald from James White, husband of Ellen White. He wrote, "We look back with a good degree of pleasure to the month of July 1849 when we published the first number of the little paper called Present Truth. We sat down to prepare the matter for that little sheet and wrote every word of it, our entire library comprising a 3-shilling pocket Bible, Cruden's Condensed Concordance, and Walker's Old Dictionary, minus one of its covers. Here James White is listing the very dictionary he and Ellen White had in their possession, all the way back to July 1849. So I obtained a copy of this dictionary. But before I open this up, let's ponder for a second about what a dictionary is. The sole purpose of a dictionary is to define words. It allows us to know the meaning of the words during the time that the book was published. Here is Walker's Dictionary. This edition was printed in 1825, and on page 399 we find plagiarism, theft, literary adoption of the thoughts or works of another. So in 1825, if you adopted someone else's thoughts or writings, you met the definition of plagiarism. But let's keep going and see if this was a consistent thought in other dictionaries as well. Here is Webster's Dictionary from 1852, and on page 831 we find plagiarism, the act of purloining another man's literary works or introducing passages from another man's writings and putting them off as one's own, literary theft. So passages taken from another man's writings, as we saw Ellen White do in the last video, was seen as theft in 1852. But I want to break this definition down even further. Let's look at what purloining meant on page 891. Purloin, literally to take or carry away for oneself, hence to steal, to take by theft, to take by plagiarism, to steal from books or manuscripts. So while the definition stands by itself, if we insert the definition of purloin, we have plagiarism is the act of stealing from books or manuscripts or introducing passages from another man's writings and putting them off as one's own. This is plagiarism defined in 1852. This is when any of Ellen White's books were written, except for a sketch of the Christian experience and views, which was published 1 year before this edition of Webster's Dictionary. Let's look at a handy dictionary of the English language by John Wood, published in 1880. On page 207 we find plagiarize, to steal from the writings of another. Plagiarism, literary theft. Plagiarist, one who purloins, which means steals, the writings of another. These definitions are again consistent with what we have seen from the first two examples, and with modern definitions. Written here in 1880, 3 years before Sketches from the Life of Paul was published. Let's look at one more from the 1800s. Here is the Standard Dictionary of the English Language by Funk and Wagnalls, Volume 2, published in 1895. For reference, Desire of Ages was published in 1898, 3 years after this dictionary was published. We read, Plagiarism, the act of plagiarizing or appropriating the ideas, writings, or inventions of another without due acknowledgement. Specifically, the stealing of passages either word for word or in substance from the writings of another and publishing them as one's own. Literary or artistic theft, a writing, utterance, or invention stolen from another. Note that it says stealing of passages. It doesn't say you have to steal the whole book, as we will see Ramik argue shortly. And why is this wrong? It is because there is no due acknowledgement. The acknowledgement is what demonstrates whose mind it originated in. The controversy surrounding Ellen White's books are that we are now finding that her writings originated in other people's minds, while she led us to believe it originated either in her mind or from heaven. In fact, the trustees of the early Adventist printing press went on the defensive early in Ellen White's career, when she published An Appeal to Mothers in 1864. A book the Adventist Church would like to forget. In this book, her health advice was so similar to that of other authors on health reform before her, the trustees felt it prudent to add to her book, "We have thought proper to add to the foregoing the following testimonies from men of high standing and authority in the medical world, corroborating the views presented in the preceding pages. In justice to the writer of those pages, which was Ellen White, we would say that she has read nothing from the authors here quoted and has read no other works on this subject previous to putting into our hands what she has written. She is not, therefore, a copyist, although she has stated important truths to which men who are entitled to our highest confidence have borne testimony." So what are they saying here? They are saying she did not copy her views from others and pass them off as her own or from God. This admission gives an insight into the thoughts of their day that copying without acknowledgement was wrong, and they felt they needed to add that she was not a copyist because her writings simply mirrored health reformers' books that preceded hers. If there was nothing wrong with copying, they would not have mentioned this, but the fact that they added this in print to her book demonstrates that they did not want the spirit of prophecy to appear to have thoughts and ideas that originated from others. Why? Because it causes a loss of reputation. The trustees from 1864 all the way to the present day have been trying to defend the same thing, her reputation based on her alleged source of information.
Welcome again. I am so excited to introduce our guests on the topic. And y'all thought you were getting just one, but we have both Brian and his beautiful wife. And so we are excited to introduce. Welcome, friends. Welcome. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. It's really good to be with you.
Yes, awesome. I love your backdrop. I love the water. You guys didn't know this, but I've got a big waterfall that I built in my backyard that's like 70 feet long. So I love that.
Tremendous. Yeah, the same idea we did.
I love it. Well, I'm not gonna take too much time getting into this. We already set the stage. Tonight's conversation is really about literary theft, literary borrowing, plagiarism, whatever the new phrase is. And I'm going to kind of hand it off to you all and have a conversation. I know, Brian, you wanted to set the stage a little bit as well, but why don't you introduce your wife and then kind of what her role was in the research. For those of you that don't have it yet, you need to pick this book up. You need to get it. It's one of the best researched books that I own on the topic. So, yeah, why don't you introduce your wife to the audience here?
Sure. So Cami, she was my right hand in publishing and writing the book, The White Elephant, helping with ideas of structure. She contributed the whole introduction, which was really her own experience with Ellen G. White and within the Adventist Church. Then wrote the final segment chapter of the book as well, where again she presented some closing thoughts. And then throughout the book, she helped me with, as I say, so much of how I presented things, and of course proofread me and made sure that I said things in the right way. So yeah, she was a tremendous help. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, we are so glad to have you both. Brian, it's interesting to me because I have not had one of these types of conversations about, I think a lot of Adventists, when they exit Adventism, the big deal is Ellen White's plagiarism. And I have not really had that kind of a conversation on this platform that actually, to me, was a part that played, but it wasn't the only thing that played a role. And so I'm excited to kind of dive into this evening. How would you set this conversation up? Like, what are some of the things that you would want to lay out when we have this conversation around literary theft or borrowing?
Yes. First of all, I would like to kind of refer back before I actually share the direct thoughts regarding plagiarism. We have in previous interviews, and of course this is all in the book as well, revealed very plainly how there was a lot of dishonesty, not only on the level of writing and perhaps borrowing other people's material, but on the level of for example, instruction on health reform, and how Ellen White contradicted her own instruction and went and over again, not only did the things which she told other people not to do, but then herself, but actually lied about whether she was doing it or not. I mean, we presented that very clearly in those things. So I want to, if we have to understand that if somebody is willing to be deceptive on other levels, there is a high possibility that they are going to be willing to be deceptive on the level, for example, if, as it is in this case, the level of borrowing from other people's writings. That video you played in the beginning was very good in that it gave a correct and historical definition of what plagiarism is about, and that it was something which was known even at the time of Ellen White. But when it comes to the actual court case, which again, correctly stated in that video, becomes the primary line of defense. That's the comeback you will hear from anybody in the church. Oh, well, there was a court case and Ellen White was exonerated of plagiarism. Yes, I would go so far as to say that on a, when one deals with the law, it is possible in a court case to make somebody look innocent who might even be guilty. That's possible. But it's not only a matter of what the law says, it's a matter of ethics as well. So we could actually tear up the dictionary, throw it away, and just look at what the Bible teaches about honesty. And I will show you now what Ellen White herself said about honesty and transparency. And we could throw all of that away and say, what is actually ethically acceptable and what would be acceptable, especially when you are delivering a message which you are claiming comes directly from the throne of God. In other words, you are a prophet and you are revealing something which ostensibly God has told you, or he has given you a view of something which might have happened in the past, and you are recounting it, such as Ellen White did over and over again, for example, in the book The Desire of Ages. And I must just throw in a little thought here. When it comes to plagiarizing, one of the books that were plagiarized from other writers, probably more so than any other in the Conflict of Ages series, is probably The Desire of Ages. Case in point. But the fact is when you come with those kind of credentials, there has to be this, the status, if you like, if I could call it that, of being beyond reproach. and that there is no room left for somebody to come back later and say, hey, by the way, you said, because I mean, when you are literally delving into the mind of Christ and you are actually writing about his thoughts and his ideas, what other people were thinking and what their actions were and what thoughts were behind those actions, and presenting it in such a way that it comes across as being, this is what God revealed to me in vision. This is what I'm sharing with you because it comes straight from God. Then it has to be made very plain that either that is your idea or you got something from somebody else. So having said that, so on the level of ethics, notwithstanding dictionary definitions and history and all of that, this is what I'd like to share, because this will help, and also with respect to other areas of dishonesty we have dealt with in previous conversations. But what I'd like to share with you, because this sets the stage, you see, because Adventists, what they do is they will make it appear that Ellen White is beyond reproach. In fact, anybody that has anything to say against Ellen White, whether it be regarding her statements about health reform and how she contradicted that, or whether she made a mistake about this.
We lost your audio. Brian, we lost your audio.
It's kind of ironic in a way that the book came out with this title. The book was titled Literary Beauty of Ellen G. White's Writings. And in the paragraph to the introduction, she makes this comment. She says, literature is remembered and appreciated according to the extent to which it may be lived or experienced. The Conflict of the Ages series, so we're dealing with specifically the Conflict of the Ages series by Ellen White, deals with a subject that touches the life of every human being. No individual can rightly claim to have escaped contact with the struggle between good and evil, both within himself and between himself and his surroundings. Now, of course, that is all true, and that's wonderful to say. But we need to also understand that when you are talking about writings, especially from somebody who's a prophet, and portraying them at this level, you also have to make it clear where those ideas come from that person is purveying through those books. And the interesting part about this is that a little bit later she goes on to say that the purpose of this book, Conflict of the Ages of series, kind of rises up and can be compared to, she says, to some of the great classics, and this is the irony of it, Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, Milton's Paradise Lost, and so on. And in fact, you will notice later on when we carry on, if I have a chance to share some of the quotes, that those were the very books that she actually plagiarized from and borrowed from in her own books, and yeah, they are used as a comparison for literary beauty in Ellen White's books. Of course, the main purpose of this book, though, was to show this, and that was to show that Ellen Harmon, who was an uneducated girl who didn't really have a solid schooling, was able, through diligent study and reading, was able to rise to the point where she could actually produce a triumph of literature for this world. Not only a triumph in that it was in its literary beauty, but a triumph in the sense that it was something which was revealed under divine inspiration, which came direct from the throne of God. Now, of course, we could pause there for a moment and say, because we will discover that there were people like Marion Davis and others who were Fanny Bolton, which we will certainly discuss as well, who actually made those books what they were, because what Ellen White gave them was not even close to what was finally produced. It was actually her editors that made the books what they were. But we will get to that point later on. One interesting thing, though, and I want to show this as a prime example of how this borrowing took place. There is a statement which Ellen White makes, and it is found originally in Special Testimony Series B, number 19, on page 23, which was published in 1905. It shows up in a few other places as well. But here's the quote. she says, in him, referring to Christ, is life that is original, unborrowed, underived life. In us there is a streamlet from the fountain of life, which is Jesus. In him is the fountain of life. Our life is something that we receive, something that the giver takes back again to himself. Now, the reason why I am sharing this, and by the way, it also appears in the Desire of Ages as well, in a more abbreviated form on page 530. But why I'm sharing this, you'll find out in a moment, is that because this statement was not Ellen White's statement. It's one of her most famous statements, but it is not her statement. In fact, the statement comes originally from Sabbath evening readings on the New Testament, St. John, with writing about St. John by Reverend John Cumming. And this is his statement. And I'm going to share the key part. He writes, in him was life that is original, unborrowed, underived. And then he goes on to say again later on, but in Jesus was life underived, unborrowed. He was the life, and the life, it is said, that was the light of men. Now she makes reference to Christ, but some of it was changed. But as far as the unborrowed, underived part is concerned, it is almost exactly what Cummings wrote in his book. So, but here is the irony. This is where the irony really becomes palpable. On page 51 and 52 in King Taylor's book, which was a book about Ellen White's writings and literary beauty and so on, this is what she says. The infinite number of ways Mrs. White finds for saying the same thing is astonishing. Each repetition views the idea from a different angle and adds new details, making stronger the lights and shadows. The effect of such repetition is kaleidoscopic. There is often a snatch of beauty in the parallel or identical rhythm of idea and its repetition. Of course, again, bearing in mind that this is all the editors, but with regards to the statement, she goes on to say, she says, a prime example, she says, of Ellen White's use of rhythm and repetition, she says, is in this quote, in Christ is life original, unborrowed, and underived. Now, I would say, yes, there was repetition, but it was not repetition of her own statements. It was actually not unborrowed and underived. It was borrowed from another author. So this is the kind of thing you stumble across when you look at the kinds of defense that Adventists are using for Ellen White, or the way in which they try and paint a particular picture about Ellen White's writings. Clearly, there is not just this. Obviously, there is not just this example, but this is one prime example, and it shows an example of of how the very sort of, I wouldn't say clever, because if one digs deep, these things become manifest very easily. But the very sort of, I would say, almost sneaky way in which Ellen White is presented as somebody who is the absolute author and originator of all these writings that she has written, and so on. In fact, I'll read a statement for you. This is part of my introduction as well, where she makes comments of that nature too. I was going to share Webster's dictionary definition of plagiarism, by the way, but we had enough from that video you played, so I don't have to do that. But with regards to this, it is ironic. In 1864, it is really in 1865 where they started having a little bit more to say about about borrowing things and about plagiarism. But in 1864, there is an article which was written in the Review by Uriah Smith. And this is what he says. This is a word, this is him, Uriah Smith, writing in 1864. And he's referring to plagiarism that is used to signify literary theft, or taking the productions of another and passing them off as one's own. Scarcely any class of people at the present day, except Seventh-day Adventists, have anything to say at all about the commandments of God. Now, he's talking about truth and the commandments of God, and he says, we are perfectly willing that pieces from the Review or any of our books should be published to any extent, and we will ask that simple justice be done by giving due credit. So here we find the Adventists speaking about plagiarism back in 1864, published in their official publication, the Adventist Review, and saying, we are actually expecting other people to give due credit for borrowing stuff out of our books, but did they apply the same standard to Ellen G. White? No. In fact, it's even more ironic because later on, by this time, of course, by the 1920s, they were making it very clear how they felt about plagiarism, because already by that time, they were starting to put in Ellen White's books different places where, quotes that she had used and so on. Not extensively, but enough at least to give people the idea that, yes, we are actually showing where she got sort of ideas from. So, but he wrote here, plagiarism, and by this is J.B. Gillian, and this is titled Spiritual Plagiarism, and it's again written in the review. It says, plagiarism is the act by one author or writer of using the productions of another without giving him credit. For example, if you were to write an article in which you inserted the Psalm of Life or any part of it and permit it to pass under your name as your own production, not giving credit to the poet Longfellow, just a poem, yeah, by the way, you would be guilty of the crime of plagiarism. Well, you say, everybody knows that Longfellow wrote the Psalm of Life. A great many do, it is true, but many do not. Those who are ignorant of the fact might easily be deceived. Notice this part, please. Those who are ignorant of the fact might easily be deceived. But whether or not they know does not lessen your guilt. You have taken what is yours and therefore are theirs, and therefore you are guilty of theft. There are but a few, perhaps, who fall under the ban of plagiarism in the literary world. So again, a standard is being applied to writing, which was not applied to Ellen White. In fact, while all of this was going on and these publications were made about plagiarism in the Adventist Church, they were still publishing books by Ellen White with loads and loads of things that were taken from other authors. Now, here is the crux, which goes back to what they were saying, and these are statements by Ellen White herself. She writes that in the Christian world today, fraud is practiced to a fearful extent. God's commandment-keeping people should show that they are above all these things. The dishonest practices which mar the dealing of man with his fellow man should never be practiced by one who professes to be a believer in present truth. God's people do great harm to the truth by the least departure from integrity. And then finally, from Sons and Daughters of God, she writes, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. The 9th commandment requires of us an inviolable regard for exact truth in every declaration by which the character of our fellow man may be affected. The tongue, which is kept so little under control of the human agent, is to be bridled, etc., etc. And then she goes on to say, yeah, I just want to go a little bit further down. An intention to deceive is what constitutes falsehood. By a glance of the eye, even, a motion of the hand, an expression of the countenance, a falsehood may be told as effectively as by words. All intentional overstatements, every hint or insinuation calculated to convey an erroneous or exaggerated impression, even the statement of facts in such a manner as to mislead, is falsehood. Now, I could read more. She still speaks about that what we say, everything that Christians do should be as transparent as sunlight. In fact, Fanny Bolton used that exact quote about Ellen White, and that's what troubled her, was because Ellen White had said everything should be as transparent as sunlight, and she found that not to be the case. So my point is this. If we are, and she takes it to the degree of even the most minimal suggestion of something which kind of misleads one or takes away from the truth, is actually dishonesty and is not correct. So you tell me, if you are writing a book and you are over and over again using quotes by other people, and you are actually even in the introduction of the book, as it is done in the Conflict of the Ages series, where it is clearly stated that these were ideas and thoughts that came from the throne of God, that were inspired, and then you write that book and people pick it up, they are going to automatically, coming from a prophet of God, they are going to automatically assume, wow, this is amazing. This is what God has revealed to somebody. So if you are not going to share with the people reading your book that actually, some of the things which I've been speaking about in this book don't really come from me. In fact, there's a number of things, in fact, more than just a number. I just want you to know, well, then is that not the same level of dishonesty which she was speaking out against in what we have just read? The answer is absolutely clear. Yes, it is exactly the same level of dishonesty. So while we are going through our discussion here on this, I wanted to share that because you will remember, no doubt, and for those who were on our previous discussions who were watching will know what kind of dishonesty there was with regards to the meat eating and how she went eating meat for decades and decades after she was practically condemning people to hell for doing the same thing. And so bear in mind that, yeah, once again, like I said in the beginning, if there's going to be dishonesty in one area, you can be sure that this is probably going to creep into different areas as well. And so with those thoughts in mind, of course, I will let you see where you want to go from here.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that setup because I think oftentimes, and this is what I feel like is so frustrating about the Ramik report. The Ramik report deals with legal plagiarism,
right?
Which is one issue, but that really isn't the most important issue, I don't think, because even if she isn't legally plagiarizing, the fact that her followers believe that these items are directly from the throne room of God is a different level of not just literary theft or literary borrowing, but literary deception.
It's totally misleading.
Yeah. So that kind of strikes at the heart of the problem. And it goes back to, I don't know if you want to consider that. That seems to me like it's ethics, but it's a level of spiritual authority when it comes to an issue.
Absolutely, yes. And it actually, it becomes even more disturbing when the very statements from the person themselves, the person in question, fly in the face. Because if Ellen White was around, I'm just hypothetically speaking, and there was a court case about somebody who was exonerated, but yet they were still guilty of doing something, she would probably have pulled out a statement like this and said, even the slightest bit of deception would not be acceptable. So her own words actually are a testimony against her.
Yeah.
The court case really was, she got off on a technicality.
Sure.
She didn't get off on truly because she did not ever borrow or ever plagiarize. She got off on a technicality. And that is what the Adventists just take that and say, well, that's enough for us. Whereas if you really stop and think about it, do you want to be telling people, well, this is something from God? And when not only is it not from God at all, but it's been, the person has lied about where they even originally got the idea from in the first place. And so, yes, ethically and morally is a much bigger issue than a technicality.
Yeah, 100%.
Exactly.
So I had a comment come in, and so this is Test the Prophet, which was one of the individuals that I shared the video, the last video that we looked at. It was from his part 3, and he has this comment here, and he actually corrects it with, he meant piracy, but Ramik said there is no such thing as piracy, plagiarism, piracy in law, only copyright infringement. Actually, he meant piracy infringement and copyright infringement. He said this in a different interview. So to both of your points, it's interesting to me that that the church, it's so funny to me that the church hired a Catholic attorney. That in and of itself is kind of funny to me. A Catholic attorney to try to prove that she wasn't a plagiarist, even though they will argue that plagiarism wasn't something that really happened back then, but yet we're going to hire someone to prove that she wasn't. But yet the issue really isn't if she's a plagiarist. The issue is was she ethically right in what she did? And the standard, and I don't know if we lost you or not, but the standard today, I mean, I can't imagine that any of us, if we had the same standard, if we reacted in the same way in our own situation, how that would pan out for my own writing or for someone else's writing. I don't know if we lost everyone or not. Looks like let me see if it looks like we lost our guests. They'll come back in just a second. But yes, Kurt, that's exactly right. The Ramik report only got them off the hook to those looking to sweep it away. And I think that's the main point of all this. When we get into the dialogue on plagiarism, which most don't even really want to use the term plagiarism anymore. Instead, they want to use the term literary borrowing. And there are multiple Adventist scholars that will, I don't know if I want to say honestly admit, that will at least admit that she did borrow. I mean, the reality is she absolutely did borrow. It's the ethics behind why and how she borrowed that we're gonna further dialogue on. All right, we got them back.
Yeah, we had to move inside. The sun was shining on the back of my phone and overheated. So
and it did not warn us.
It didn't give me a warning either. So we are.
All right.
So I lost what you said there.
Yeah, no worries. What I was kind of referring to is, it's interesting because if we applied the same standards today to, let's say, Mark Finley, or let's say, Doug Batchelor or Ted Wilson or the new conference president, we would never allow a spiritual leader that has clout similar to, let's just say, Ellen White, to just rip things out of other authors. And think about the reality of ripping authors off that aren't even Adventists, because these authors that she was using were, they were heathens. They were apostates. They weren't even Adventists.
Yeah, no, Adventists would have viewed them as such. And yet she tells us in her writings not to read the writings of other authors and people who do not believe as we do. So look, in everything that Ellen White did, when you really dig beneath the surface, and if you are willing, the Bible says, search for the truth as a pearl of great price. Truth stops at a certain point. So yes, we're told to search for the truth, but once you've discovered Ellen White and once you've discovered the truth in Adventism, we are told that your search is over, buddy. You don't have to go any further than this. But if we are going to search, we need to, because there is so much evidence and information out there that shows the absolute dishonesty in so many things that was happening in the ministry of Ellen White. And then later on, of course, because then it became a ducking and diving routine on how do we actually protect the prophet of God, because you can't have the prophet of God who is the final prophet to this world, who is on the level of Elijah and John the Baptist, and then suddenly tell the world, oh, oops, so, we were wrong about that. She's not really a prophet even, and we've established our whole church on this. So now we have, for the last 100 years or more, we've had the church trying to defend her, and I'm almost 100% sure. In fact, I've heard this from various theologians and Bible scholars, because some of them have literally told us. I'm 100% sure that there were discussions behind the scenes of people who were saying, you know what, if we come out with a blatant truth, that's it. It's over for the Adventist denomination. The only way to do this is to slowly get this out of the picture, and that's why in the introduction of The White Elephant, Cami wrote that chapter about the pastor who he belonged to a ministry that was actively trying to get rid of Ellen G. White. She can certainly read some of that. But what I'm saying is you can't, because the church would be lost. So you've got to still have the prophet, but you've got to find a sort of more clandestine way of slowly but surely getting her out of the picture. So eventually, maybe a few decades down the line, people are going to say, oh, yeah, Ellen White, yeah, well, no, but we have the truth, And so Ellen White doesn't really matter anymore. But I'm going to let Cami just share this one particular part here, because it's so powerful in respect to that statement.
Well, it was kind of ironic because the pastor, not the senior pastor, but one of the main pastors of the church that I was attending when we started writing this book and having issues, he actually is the only person that called me to actually talk to me about this situation. And so I'm going to just read a little bit of this. It says, I sent a letter to the ex-church board in Denver, Colorado on Tuesday, June 17, 2014, requesting that my boys' names and my name be removed from membership of the SDA church. I received a message on my phone on Thursday night from one of the pastors, we'll call him Pastor Z, an older man in his 70s, who served the SDA church as a pastor and evangelist for many years. The next morning, when I returned his call, he told me that the church had regretfully agreed to accept my request for membership removal, but he was surprised because he always took me for a devout Christian and was wondering what happened. I wondered why my Christianity was being questioned and realized they must not have read my letter to the church board, or they would not question my faith in God and belief in Jesus, Christianity. He said that a reference was made as to my not accepting Ellen White and thought some of the doctrine was based on her writings. I was disappointed at the fact that they had not even read my letter, but proceeded nonetheless to explain why I had made the decision to separate from the SDA denomination. I told him about the research we had done over the past couple of years and what we had discovered regarding Ellen White and how some of the church's vital teachings were unbiblical because of the influence of her writings. Throughout the conversation, he told me he knew about some of the things I was saying and knew them to be true. He said he personally knew Walter Rea, the author of the book The White Lie, and that Rea had shown him all the books Ellen White had used and took credit for in her writings. Walter Rea had demonstrated this to him by allowing him to point anywhere he wanted in Ellen White's books 10 times at random. Then Rea would go and get the book that she had taken it from. He was able to produce another book and author every single time. Pastor Z told me that he knew that Ellen White lied and plagiarized and said a lot of things that were not correct and purposefully misled people. However, he said, she also did a lot of good things and was very important founder of the church, and that the SDA church wouldn't be what it is today if it weren't for Ellen White. I responded by stating that if growth, wealth, and numbers were signs of the true church, then the Catholic Church would be it.
So there's a pertinent case in point.
Yeah, I did not know until recently that a friend of mine from probably 15, maybe 20, probably about 20 years ago is the grandson of Walter Rea. And I had the privilege of talking to him about kind of his experience with his grandpa. And it was almost identical to what you're saying. Like Walter Rea was just a wealth of knowledge. He practically could pull down any quote from anywhere. He knew her in and out. I mean, the fact that the Adventist Church kind of creates this idea or this narrative that Walter Rea didn't know what he was talking about, or that he was being dishonest or whatever it was. The guy was a very respected individual and very well researched, very educated. So yeah, it's crazy to me. I mean, just that the level of why do you think the church? This is kind of I think it'll be an easy question for you, but why do you think the church is so willing to sweep these realities under the carpet? Why is that the case?
Just like that, what that pastor said. He said because she's done. Where would the Adventist Church be without Ellen White? And so because she's the founder and she did all these things, we're just going to totally overlook all of this other stuff that actually proves that she's a false prophet, because where would we be as the Seventh-day Adventist Church without Ellen White? And that's crazy.
Yeah, and to make it even more significant with regards to the defense of Ellen White, you see, when you've got a denomination which over the last 150 more years has established itself in this world, one of the wealthiest denominations around the world with tremendous amount of influence that is established. I mean, if it were not for Ellen White, we need to bear that in mind. If it were not for Ellen White and, of course, the other early Adventist pioneers, there would not be a Seventh-day Adventist church. The Adventist church is founded on the platform of right from the early days, when we talk about the Great Disappointment, Ellen White was there. She was there right at the very beginning. She was the key founder of the Adventist Church. The doctrines of this church are in most respects indebted to the writings of Ellen White, how they interpret the Bible, the views they have on so many different subjects. So when you have this, and you have this wealthy denomination, and now you are reaching a point where people are starting to realize, you know what, we have a problem, because this person over and over again, that was the actual founding member, the pillar of our church, is shown to be a false prophet. You've got to find a way of still keeping the church alive, but how are you going to do that without the person who was the founder and pillar of the church? So they are facing this struggle. So the only way you can do this is logical, it is rational. The only rational, logical way to do this is to lie, is to paint a false picture, is to try and make, so you have books coming out, Prophets Are Human by Bradford, and books that kind of make, yes, there were little things, and give a little snatch here and there of maybe some things which seem to be discrepancies. But, you know, Ellen White was also a human being. And without actually saying, you know what, this is far deeper than just these superficial things you are speaking about in this book. There is deception that goes to the deepest level. So we are slowly but surely going to let a little bit out, a little bit down, until people sit back and say, oh, okay, it's not really such a big deal. Oh, and by the way, the court case was won as well. She was vindicated. And so we have all these different one-liners about Ellen White and how everything was sorted out. Fact of the matter is they have to find a way to keep this alive. They've got to find a way, and the only way is to be deceptive. There is no other way you can do it. Because I tell you what, pastors are going to lose jobs. They're not going to be, there are going to be members leaving. If this was revealed at the level that it would be if people were blatantly honest about it and said, you know what, this is the deal, there would be an absolute collapse. So that cannot happen, because there are too many people at the top of the pyramid of the Adventist church who want to keep it alive, their lives, their wealth. And believe me, there's wealth involved in it as well. But reputations, everything is actually hanging on this. And the only way to do it is to be deceptive. That's the only way.
Yeah. So I want to go to actually a section while you were talking there. I was able to pull this up. This is actually a quote, and I don't know if you're going to go here at some point, but I want to read a quote from page 149 in your book.
Yes.
I'm going to get this on the screen real quick. So this is, and those of you should be able to see it. I just took a quick screenshot and threw it up on the screen because I don't have it well laid out in Logos. But this is actually, if you want to give some backdrop to this, this is George W. Amadon, who served 50 years in various positions at the Review and Herald Publishing Association. This is you all writing. He was another individual who had been a close friend of the White family. Walter Rea shares a stenographically recorded interview.
Right.
This is an interview. And the interview says this: I knew a large share of it, meaning How to Live. And which book is that? How to Live?
Sketches from the Life of Paul.
Okay.
With reference to sketches of the Life of Paul.
Okay. I knew a large share of it was borrowed. I said that Sister White never writes the prefaces to her books. I happen to know that others write them. And I said it had been stated formally in the preface of the book that such things had been taken from other books, that what had been copied verbatim ought to have been in quotation marks or set in finer type or in footnotes or something of the sort, the way printers generally do. She never reads the proof. Sister White never in the office sat down and read proofs properly. You know, in the days of Elder James White, how her writings were handled just as well as I do. So,
Right.
Speak a little bit to this quote.
Yeah. So that's like from the horse's mouth, somebody who was right there and who saw what happened, even back in the days of James. You see, when James White was alive, James was actually the one who controlled Ellen White's writings. It was after James White died that people like Marion Davis, and then a little bit later on, of course, Fanny Bolton come into the picture, because they needed somebody, because Ellen White she did not have the capability of editing books. In fact, it's quite clear, and I record this in the book as well, that some of the things she submitted to be published were like all over the place, with quotes from here, quotes from there, statements, things were not grammatically correct, syntax, and there were so many things that were not right. So they took all this stuff and they put it together. Now, James White did that originally. So by the time it came to reading proofs, and I would think that this is part of the reason, Ellen White did not know enough about it. Now, I'll be fair and say, look, I mean, if you're a true prophet of God, you don't have to know about all that stuff. If God's giving you a message and somebody can put it across, that's fine. But when you are starting to present ideas of other people, it becomes a different story. And then you are relying on other people to present it. You actually should go over and say, well, is that really what God presented to me? Or are they kind of embellishing it or are saying it in a way which I didn't really want to present it? So it becomes very significant, this thing of Ellen White not looking over the proofs that were going in for publication. Because on another occasion, she actually writes and says that she does look over the proofs, that she herself actually looked at them to see what they were saying. So again, do we say that, well, who's true? Was this statement true, or is she just telling another fib amongst the other fibs that she told about so many other things? The fact of the matter is, though, that we know now in retrospect, because we got so much evidence, that there was borrowing, that her editors themselves said that they took her writings and presented them in such a way that they actually became readable and were up to the high standard that they should be for publication. So, yeah, there you have it.
So I want to, I think that it's just really important to understand that when we're having this, if we were having this discussion about anyone else, like, Stephen King, or, let's just throw an author out there, right? The dialogue becomes different, because it's one thing for an author to take something from another author and then intend to use it, or whether it's actual intent, or whether it's, oops, I accidentally did, or whether it's nowadays I used ChatGPT and then I edited it, and like plagiarism has become a totally different thing nowadays. But I want the audience to really understand why this is so important. Is it would be a totally different discussion if Ellen White was just an author. If she didn't say that these were from the throne room of God, if she didn't say that the angels gave it to her, if she didn't say that God directed, or that the Holy Spirit directed, or that I can't move my pen unless the Holy Spirit moves upon me. Like, if she didn't make these statements or make these high spiritual claims about her writings, then we wouldn't be having these discussions. The fact is that she put her own writings in a totally different category than any other author.
Yeah, in fact, let me just share this quote. She says, in the testimonies that I bear, this comes from Selected Messages, book 127, she makes a statement, I'm presenting to you that which the Lord has presented to me. I do not write one article in the paper expressing merely my own ideas. They are what God has opened before me in vision, the precious rays of light shining from the throne.
And she's right, they aren't her ideas, but they are somebody else's
ideas. So that's her own statement, coming back again to reveal the truth.
Yeah, and it's funny because the tail that wags the dog here for an Adventist, because I've heard Adventists say, well, I mean, of course God could. I mean, don't you think God could put, the thoughts and ideas in another author's mind, and then Ellen White comes along and sees that and uses it? I mean, isn't that such a beautiful thing? I even had my own dad tell me that.
Yeah,
isn't
God
that
showed her what to use.
Beautiful thing?
Yeah, I've heard that one many times. Yes.
What's the problem with that?
The problem is she didn't say that when she
That's
wrote
right.
it. The problem is she didn't actually say, "Hey, this is a really beautiful thing that I read from Paradise Lost,
and it's exactly what God
and
showed.
I'm going to share this with you because this is what God said is true." She didn't do that.
Yeah, and that's such a good point, because it would be ethically and literarily sound if I heard like, let's say I had a dream one night, and I dreamed that I was supposed to share something from Max Lucado's book, Well, it would be honest of me to say, "Hey Brian, hey Cammy, I had this dream, and I was impressed to go to Max's book,
Right.
and can I show you what he wrote? This is so good. This is godly. You need to read this."
Right.
Versus me writing my own thing, copying his book and saying, "This is from God and it's directly from heaven."
Yeah, this goes back to her own statements about absolute transparency.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, I know in your book, and those of you that listen, if you haven't picked up this book, I mean, you need to go buy it. It'll be a good resource for research, lots of quote, footnotes, all that stuff. I know in this particular chapter, there's so many things I have highlighted here. This is chapter 6. Talk a little bit. I know we're going back in the beginning of the chapter, but talk a little bit about this high shelf idea, because I know that there's a lot of people that will say, "Oh, no. Ellen White was very clear about this. I mean, she even said, like, she had all this other stuff way up on her shelf. She never read those items that she quoted from. That's a testament to the miracle that God did through her and her uneducated mind." They go to that, like, she was uneducated, and so talk a little bit about this high shelf idea.
Yeah, I mean, that whole thing came about, the high shelf thing, because of a book that Jane Andrews had given to Ellen G. White, John Milton's poem,
A copy of Paradise Lost.
Poem of Paradise Lost. But here's the irony of it. So on the one hand, they'll come up with this high shelf thing, and on the other hand, they'll say that God showed her what to use and what not to use. So what was it? Was it that it was on a shelf, she never read it? Or was it that she read it and God showed her what to use? So there are always these funny little defenses that come up that contradict the other defenses that there were. I mean, it's actually, I would also recommend that people read, of course, Walter Rea's book, The White Lie, because that whole book is really dedicated to the plagiarism issue. But in chapter 5, for example, of Walter Rea's book, he gives an account of how John Milton's 1667 poem, Paradise Lost, was given to Ellen White by Jane Andrews after he heard her account of the great controversy vision. So he said, "Wow, that sounds just like what I read in Paradise Lost," and so he gave her a copy. So Jane Andrews had taken a copy, and I'm quoting here from Walter Rea, of Paradise Lost to Ellen White when he recognized that her account of the great controversy was similar to that of John Milton in his epic poem 1667. According to Arthur L. White, this is what he said about this whole situation: she had put it up on a high shelf and she had never read it. So the whole thing about the high shelf story, so everybody started saying, "Oh, well, all these books," because Ellen White had many books in her library, and many of them books that one finds quotes of in her writings, or at least adapted quotes in her writings, and plagiarism at different levels. And the argument was, and it came from this whole idea that, well, they were up on a shelf, she never read them, and maybe, I don't know, maybe in a dream, the book floated down from a shelf and she was able to look at it in a dream and it went back. I don't know. Sorry, I'm just being facetious. But the fact of the matter is that the only arguments that could make sense, in fact, the only argument, or the only bit of, it's not even an argument actually in her favor, but the only thing that makes sense is that she did pull the book down from the high shelf. She did read it. She put it back on the high shelf and then wrote in her book, but just neglected to say, "By the way, I got this idea from Milton in his poem about this and I decided to include it." There's no other way of getting around it. Those books did not stay on the high shelf Those books were actually read by her, and she included ad nauseum, as you heard Cammie's testimony from that pastor, where Walter Rea pulled down, name the book, and he pulled down a book from the shelf, book after book
Point
after
anywhere.
book, anywhere you want to. And I'll show you the book where it originally came from. That is the level of plagiarism that she was involved in. There was no such thing as those books staying
Because
on our
that
shelf.
basically means he could point anywhere, and Walter Rea could show him another author and another source anywhere in her books. That means virtually she plagiarized everything she wrote in those
And
Conflict of the
that
Ages series.
was that specifically on Desire of Ages? Is that the book that
It was the Conflict of the Ages
series. The series.
The
Series.
whole
Okay.
Conflict of the Ages series.
Yeah.
You see, yeah. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've said this a couple of times in the last couple of weeks live, and I've kept the Adventist scholar who said this private because I don't have his permission to say it.
Okay.
But I will say what's interesting is there are Adventist scholars that will claim that the specifically Desire of Ages, but even the Conflict of the Ages series should be categorized as Christian fiction.
Absolutely.
Because it's actually not real, and it didn't come, like, there's evidence that it was this particular scholar doesn't like the term plagiarism because he doesn't feel like it matches what really happened. Like intellectual literary borrowing
Splitting
is maybe
hairs. That's what it's called.
It's called
splitting hairs. That's what it's called. Yeah.
But yeah, it was like it was interesting to me to hear this guy say, yeah, this in his mind, these books, which I think this is a lie, but in his mind, he thinks that these books are not intended to be seen or viewed as directly from God. That it was
so you just read the introduction, and it's meant to be viewed that way.
Well, and she herself says that everything came from God.
So, and by the way, this is just a very beautiful way of placating your conscience by actually saying something like that about how you should view it. That's all it is, because it's nothing else. It's actually placating your conscience and saying, we're okay. It's just a fiction. In fact, it's true. It is fiction, of course, because the stuff she took was taken from authors who were writing fiction themselves. So the whole thing is fiction from beginning to end.
They got inspired by God.
That. Yeah, they never claimed it. But the point is it's all fictional. You see, the crazy thing about this is that, and I'd just like to share this with you, because, again, at the time of Walter Rea, and in fact, he had not even published the book. He went to the brethren and said, look here, brethren, there's a big problem. I have discovered this in the writings of Ellen White. Let's get together and let's talk about this. So they did get together. In fact, they got together on January 28 at the GLendale Adventist Hospital.
What year?
In 1980, by the way. This is when it all began. They got together, and there's a list. In fact, the scholars that were present at this meeting, it was actually organized by General Conference President Neil Wilson. He's the one who organized the meeting. And they got together with Walter Rea. There are people, I mean, I'm not going to read all of them because it's pointless. It's all in the book. But there were people from all over the Adventist denomination, leadership in the church. At the end of the meeting, after Walter Rea had presented his material, this was the recommendations that the brethren made. That we recognize, and I'm quoting now, that Ellen White in her writings used various sources more extensively than we had previously believed. That as soon as possible, a plan be developed for thoroughly informing our church administrators concerning the nature and extent of Ellen White's use of sources. That immediate study be given to a plan for educating the church in easily grasped steps on the subject of inspiration and Ellen White's use of sources. And just a pause there. They're still trying to do that, but not in such in very minute steps. And that an in-depth study on the writing of the Desire of Ages particularly be implemented. That a person trained in scholarly methodology be asked to work with Elder Rea to express our appreciation to Elder Rea for the enormous amount of work he has done. Well, so this is what they said after the meeting, because they realized we are in serious trouble here. We've got to do something about it. Well, long story short, they never really did anything about it. So yeah, we jump ahead in time, because then in December issue of Spectrum 1991, this is after another lot of meetings. I'm sure people are familiar with the Spectrum magazine. It's an Adventist forum where they discuss various topics and things. There appeared an article by Jerry A. Gladstone entitled "Convert or Scholar: An Odyssey in Humility," and he wrote, Jerry Gladstone is, and by the way, at this point in time, he was vice president and dean of academic affairs of Psychological Studies Institute and Interdenominational Graduate School of Psychology and Religion in Atlanta, Georgia. So, well-educated man. This is what he was saying. And by the way, previous to this, he was professor of religion at Southern College, one of our Adventist universities, from which he received a BA, whatever his credentials were. What's important is what he says, and I quote, "Neither have we dealt adequately," this is after now 1980, "neither have we dealt adequately with the questions raised by Walter Rea regarding Ellen White. Although his claims tended to be overstated, the church has gradually come to concede all his major points. In 1990, 10 years later, Fred Feltman reported to the church at large his findings in 2 articles appearing in Ministry Magazine. The Desire of Ages Project, the data October 1990 was the title of it. And then it says, he was careful to point out that he had examined only a small section of the Desire of Ages, thus making it difficult to generalize. But he concluded that Ellen White did use sources without giving credit, and that she at times even denied doing so. The Desire of Ages was dependent on secondary materials. On the whole, an average, listen to this, an average of about 31% of the 15 chapters was in some way indebted to other materials. Worse, her history, chronology, and theological interpretation, which came straight from the throne of God, often cited confidently by Adventists, were not always reliable. So the church kept on admitting these things, but as far as the general Adventist public were concerned, they were not telling them the truth. In fact, they go on later to say regarding this. These are some of the statements made by leading people in the Adventist church. Robert Olson, Ron Graybell, GLendale and Long Beach tapes. This comes off those tapes that were made. In 1990, those tapes were made, and this is what they said. There was massive borrowing on all levels of Mrs. White's writings. The church had never before either known or admitted such borrowing to the membership or the public, no matter what we continue to read from the review or other writers. Again, on the same tapes, what was revealed through those tapes was not always accurate. What she wrote was not always accurate. She made mistakes. It cannot be said, therefore, that she was always speaking from God. Another point, again, from the Graybell paper, 1990 Bible conference. This is the statement they made back then already. Others helped her to do the gathering of material and also to do the writing. Or again, another one by Robert Olson. All of what she said she saw did not come from visions. Another one from Robert Olson. All that came to the church in these writings were not inspired. Again, Robert Olson. She was influenced by others in what she wrote, and those that influenced her never claimed to be influenced by God or inspired themselves. Again, this is Ron Graybell. I'm just giving the names of the people who are responsible for sharing this. All these sources are in the book, The White Elephant. She was influenced by, Mrs. White, and this goes back to one of our previous discussions. Mrs. White ate meat most of her life and did not take much of the advice she claimed came from God. And then finally, she was not as uneducated, as well-educated or uninformed in an informed sense and unread as we have always been told. She was educated in an informal sense by reading and studying. So she was not just this uneducated girl who received vision. She had at least enough knowledge to read books and get data from books and put them in their own works. So there's clear evidence that the brethren knew exactly what was going on, but they did not share this information with the church at large. And this is what I said earlier, they decided to start a campaign by slowly but surely getting rid of Ellen White instead of just coming out with the truth, because they knew what they stood to lose if they actually did go out and tell the truth in its unadulterated form.
Yeah. I took the liberty of it's not the best share, but I took a picture of the page 156 that you're reading from.
Oh, sorry.
And just for the audience there, if you don't have it, these are the kind of charges that they were kind of laid out. And then I actually had highlighted below that, in relation to the issue of plagiarism, it is most evident based on more extensive research that Ellen White is guilty as charged. And this is just, again, from people admitting. I mean, this is what people have to understand. This is not, it's one thing for, Brian and Cammie to say guilty as charged. It's one thing for Mike and Jen Colburn to say, like, hey, I think that she's guilty as charged. These are people that have admitted GLendale tapes. These are 1919 Bible Conference. This is the, Robert Olson. These are people that have, Adventist authority, that have Adventist leadership rank, that are admitting. Now, they don't ever follow through. They don't ever follow through on the research and, hey, we need to put together a committee and we need to support, Walter Rea. They actually throw Walter Rea out and kind of toss him to the wolves. But this is evidence that they at least admitted that something needed to be done about this. And the receipts are there. I mean, they're there. People can read it if they want to read it.
So this is why ultimately Walter Rea was almost forced to write the book, The White Lie, because after they admitted all of this and never did anything about it, he goes on to say, and I actually shared the statement because he made in fact, before his death in 2004, he made some final comments about this whole issue with the White Lie and what the church was doing. And he said, with the endorsement of all these people from the church leadership, he said, with this kind of endorsement, would any of you have done any differently? It was only, he said, when the church backed out of the agreement that I then wrote The White Lie, so that all who wanted to know could know what the committee had promised that they should know. And then he asked the question, who lied, them or me? So it was under duress that finally he said, you know what, they're not going to do anything about this. They've admitted everything. They said they were going to put up this committee and do things. They never did it. And so I'm going to write a book and expose it.
It's because Walter Rea had no intention of trying to destroy the Seventh-day Adventist Church. No. It was not his intention to even leave the church. He saw that there was a problem. He was an honest man. He went to the church in honesty and said, this is my findings. He believed them when they said, we're going to do something about this. We are going to make this clear to all of our people that this is what's going on. And they didn't do it. And so then it forced his hand. It forced him to write the book. He did not do this out of rebellion. He didn't do it because he had an axe to grind with the Adventist church. He did it purely from his conscience, knowing it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, so the question has to be asked. I mean, he said, who lied, them or me? In fact, I put it this way, is out of all of this, they have gone and tried to make Walter Rea look like some guy who was just bent on causing trouble in the church and trying to paint the church back in white black. The only people in this whole scenario that had integrity was Walter Rea. He had the integrity to tell the truth, and they were the ones, the church, because now Ellen White's long dead. The problem now rests on the church. The onus rests on the Adventist church to come clean. And the Adventist church, from its leadership down to those and those who do know better, the onus rests on them to have the kind of integrity that Walter Rea had and step out and say, we have to. We are compelled by God, actually, to step out and tell the world the truth and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, that's such a good, when my wife and I left the church, and I know you guys maybe had the same situation in your circumstance, but when we left the church, There were so many people that came out and said, Mike, why can't you just stop talking? Just leave. You've made your decision. Why do you have to keep speaking out? Why do you have to keep sharing all this stuff? You know, God doesn't want us to defame other people, like all this stuff,
No, yes.
just why can't you just be a good boy and just walk away and leave? It's that whole thing.
Yeah.
What's your response to that? Why did you guys feel that you could just walk away and not say anything?
Well, I'll let Cami give her point of view as well. But because we couldn't continue living a lie. I mean, for me, as somebody who had been an apologist for Ellen White, somebody who had defended her, almost, to the hilt with everything, and who had but unfortunately had been deceived. When the evidence came to me of what was really going on and what she'd done, there's no way that I could. In fact, anybody with common sense and anybody with an ounce of integrity and the desire to tell the truth. I mean, we are human. I admit that and everything else. I've made mistakes and things, but when it came to something in my life where I had actually defended something so strongly, how could I go out and then just kind of pretend that none of that actually happened, that everything that I had said previously was true? I had to make some kind of public statement and say, look, I am sorry. I've spent 16 years traveling around the world defending Ellen White, preaching from pulpits all over the Adventist world, making Ellen White the next best thing to sliced cheese. And now I'm just going to walk away from it and pretend that it was all true. There's no way. It rested upon me and ultimately Cami too, because we both came to the same conclusion to say we have to tell the truth. Otherwise, it is on our conscience.
Well, part of it for me is my entire life, from the time I became an Adventist until I started discovering what was really going on, I was involved in evangelism. I was involved in bringing people to meetings. I held meetings and drew people from the town to come to the meetings to hear the truth. And what was the truth according to Adventism? Well, a lot of it has to do with throwing a lot of stones at the Roman Catholic Church and calling them the Antichrist and saying if they say, well, why don't you just be quiet about this stuff? Why don't they be quiet about the Catholic Church? Why don't they be quiet about the Pope? Why don't they be quiet about these other Sunday keeping churches that they call Babylon and that Ellen White calls Babylon? Why don't they be quiet if they want everybody else to be quiet? But when the shoe is on the other foot, then they want everybody to just be quiet and don't say anything because we don't want this to be a disruption in the church. But they don't mind disrupting the Catholic Church or all the other Protestant churches with what they have to say. So it's very hypocritical.
Yeah.
It is. So I wanted those that are watching, because some may or may not have the book, but the quote that Brian was reading from, and this is actually for those of you that are watching, you'll see a 33. You'll see that I had previously written "wow" this is in my own book, okay. But footnote 33 is actually from Who Lied, Them or Me, Walter Rea, to dear friends. This is in August 1992 letter. And so I just want people to understand that this is Walter Rea. Like this is, and I know, Brian, you'd already read this, but I want people to see that this is Walter Rea's conclusion. Okay, I rest my case. Like he's done the research, he's resting his case, he's saying, listen, this is what we've concluded. This is what he had concluded at this time with that kind of endorsement. And the endorsement, I have it. I wish I could. Well, actually, I can. I mean, there are endorsements from GC chairman, White Estate, conference president, Pacific Press, GC Education, Andrews University. It's W.G. Johnson, attorney at law, Harold Lance, another individual from the GC, the president of the Pacific Union. I mean, Loma Linda minister. I mean, there are at least, I don't know how many here. I mean, there are a dozen or more scholars, probably 15 or 18 scholars that are in the notes here. So Walter Rea says, listen, I rest my case. This kind of endorsement is what has been given my research. Would any of you have done any different? It was only when the church backed out that he then wrote the book. So if you've been told, and this is why I wanted to bring this up, if you've been told, don't read Canwright's book, don't read The White Lie, don't read Walter Rea's book, he's just upset at the church. Don't read The White Elephant. Brian and Cammie, they're just upset and mad at the church. If you've heard this garbage, none of this stuff is coming from a heart of hate towards the church. Walter Rea concluded what he concluded. He was endorsed that, hey, this is good research, and he was doing it, as Cammie had said, out of his heart. He didn't want to leave the church. He loved the Adventist church. He wanted the church to be honest. But when they refused to be honest, he had to come out and write the book, The White Lie. And so I would encourage you to pick the book up, read it. Obviously, it gets quoted a lot in Brian and Cammie's book, The White Elephant. So, friends, I wanted to move into, before we get out of time, I wanted to definitely move the conversation to an aspect that oftentimes I hear in the apologetic world, from individuals that want to plead the case that, the arguments that were made against Ellen White's plagiarism from her literary assistants, those need to be disregarded because, Fanny Bolton, for example, I mean, Fanny was crazy. She went crazy. She was put in an institute. We should not listen to her because she was a psycho.
Yeah.
So I want to open up that conversation around Fanny Bolton because I feel like they did the same thing to Fanny as they did to Canwright, as they do to Walter Rea, as they do to a lot of these individuals that come out. They tend to, we can't battle them, and so we're just going to attack their character or their mental health or their credentials or something else so that people don't read them. So let's dive into this this conversation around Fanny Bolton.
Okay.
Well, there's a whole chapter in the book that is specifically about the Fanny Bolton story, and it's one of the most tragic stories that you could ever hear, honestly.
Yeah. So this has been the modus operandi, or the thing to go to when you can't actually substantiate your argument, attack the person and make them look as bad as possible. I know the same was done to me, the same was done to Walter Rea, the same was done to Canwright, the same was done to Kellogg, the same was done to Ballinger, and of course the same was done to Fanny Bolton. And there are
so Brian, real quick before you go into this, I want to ask you guys a pointed question. Brian, Cammie, do you hate the Adventist church? Do you have enmity and hatred and hostility towards the Adventist church?
Never. Never. In fact, it broke our hearts to find this stuff out. It made us sick, physically sick, to actually find these things out. So no, in no way was there any. In fact, the pastors that came to our house when we decided to leave the church begged us not to do it. We were very involved. We loved the church. We were involved in the church, and they begged us to not do it because it's not because they didn't agree with us, because they actually did agree with us. But they wanted us to stay in and try to bring in reformation, to bring in reform with the church. But we thought that to do it that way was deceptive. We didn't want to join a clandestine group of people who are trying to sweep things under the rug and let's little by little get this out of our church. We think that things have to be hit head on, especially since there are there are factions of the church who hold on to Ellen White, as they should, if she really is a true prophet, if she really is what the church was founded on, if it really was from God, then that would be fine. But the problem is if it's not, and then you're just going to try to cover it up and try to act like that it doesn't exist, or try to slowly get it out without actually dealing with it. What are you going to do with all those people who don't understand any of that and who are still holding on to Ellen White? Unless you just tell the truth about Ellen White.
Yeah. So the bottom line is absolutely not. In fact, we love the church. I mean, as you yourself, it's from generations and generations of SDAs. My family many of them are still SDAs. And unfortunately, the older generations have died off now. But even while they were alive, I mean, we loved them. We loved them even in spite of the issues that we knew that they were wrong on with regards to the spirit of prophecy and that. But we treated them with respect and generosity, and while trying to share the truth with them as well. Like my mother, for example, bless her, she's died now. But we love the church. We love the people. I mean, the things that we had problems with was the dishonesty, was with what Ellen White had done and is still doing via her writings to people who are in the church. But as far as the church itself, the people, because the church is made up of people, we love the people. And there are many people who are saved, are going to be saved in the Adventist. You're not saved by denomination. You're saved by your relationship with Christ and through what he has done for us. So for us, it matters not what denomination you belong to, whether you're Catholic, whether you're Baptist or Methodist or Adventist. We love all Christians. So it makes no difference to us.
Yeah, I remember a similar situation to what you described, with people kind of begging you to stay, so to speak. I sat down with our pastor, who I was the head elder at the time. And so I remember sitting down with our pastor and expressing some of these, like, hey, I've got some real concerns. And his statement to me was, well, Mike, you just have to remember that these are Adventists and they want to hear Adventist things. And I told him, I said, no, it's not true. But I also said, well, maybe you can do that. I can't, because I have people coming to me and asking what's in the Bible? What does the Bible say about this? And I would have to tell them, well, do you want me to tell you what Scripture says or what the Adventist Church teaches about it?
Right.
Because they're not the same, oftentimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get into this story. Let's get into the Fanny Bolton story.
So
I know several in the comments are saying they really did her dirty, but let's talk a little bit about this and break this apart here.
Yeah, let's try and do that. First of all, I'd like to say that really, in a sense, the Fanny Bolton story, as far as all the evidence we have available today, is actually totally irrelevant. Now, you might think, what the heck? No, it's evidence. What I'm saying, even if we didn't have the experience of Fanny Bolton, we have so much evidence now about what Ellen White did. In fact, the evidence comes from her own writings herself and from what has been revealed. The Fanny Bolton story just consolidates things which we already know. And as Cami said, it's a very tragic story, because Fanny Bolton was
sincere.
Well, she was sincere. She made mistakes, no doubt about it. Later on in her experience, she fell in love with a man who was in the process of, he was separated and divorced and whatever. I mean, she was a human being who made mistakes, and she did things that were wrong. But this is not really the issue. I mean, if we had to start pointing fingers at people and discrediting them because they did something that was wrong or sinful, I think all of us would be in serious trouble. So we can't. None of us can walk away from this. And in fact, if one wants to talk about that, we could point out the trouble Ellen White was in because of the many lies and dishonesty that she was involved in. So the thing with Fanny Bolton is, let's look at her as a person who was a human being, but as a person who, first of all, was extremely bright, who was educated. In fact, in her early years, she was, after she'd finished school, she went and worked for a magazine, which was a publication in Chicago, which was actually the forerunner to the Chicago Tribune. So she had extensive knowledge in the ethics and in all the law that was involved with publishing and writing and so on. So she knew what was actually acceptable and non acceptable. And why I emphasize this is she went from that, after her conversion experience, which was in 1885. After that, she went from this background of being very much in the mainstream publishing industry, working for a newspaper, and knowing what was actually acceptable and not acceptable, and then suddenly ending up in a position where she became the editor for this prophetess in a church, and started getting pieces of information and materials from her that she had to organize and put together. And of course, started realizing that, man, a heck of a lot of this stuff that I am getting, and I'm paraphrasing because I could quote for you out of the book, but it's all in the book, The White Elephant. But I'm actually using this material, and I know that this is coming from another author. Not only is Ellen White not crediting the authors who are providing her with this material, it's giving the impression that it actually comes from God, but also that when everything is said and done, from all the bits and pieces she gives us, which were not grammatically correct, which we had to arrange and put together, she does not even give credit to us, because she comes from, remember, the mainstream publishing industry she comes from. She knows that people who are editors and who are formulating articles, putting them together and whatever, they get credit for doing that work. But in none of her books was she giving credit, not on the level of where she was borrowing from, and also not on the level of actually who Marion Davis and herself at this point in time were actually making these books sound as wonderful as they actually sounded. So that's the background.
So tell, and some may know this story, because I agree that we don't need Fanny Bolton to make the case
Sure.
that Ellen White did what she did. The reason Fanny Bolton's story, I think, is so compelling, and this is just my personal opinion, I don't know how you all feel about it. It's compelling because it speaks to the psychological abuse that Ellen White actually implanted and impressed on someone who was so close to her work and saw so much of the errors that she was doing. I firmly believe, again, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I'm not going to, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but it seems from the evidence that the reason that she had a mental break is predominantly because of Ellen White's abuse on her. That would be my argument.
Yes.
I don't know how you all feel about that.
Yes, so I agree with you 100%. In fact, the reason why and so it's kind of ironic about I'm saying what I'm saying about her not necessarily being, that we don't need her evidence to make the case. But the point is, I put it in the book for the very reasons that you are stating right now. And that is that there was, that's why Cami calls it a tragic story as well, was that she came to this with a particular frame of mind. She really felt that she was doing work for somebody who was inspired, that was a prophet of God. And then it was like she was being intimidated by Ellen White. Ellen White intimidated her through this whole, because every time she tried to raise the issue of giving credit to other authors, and also giving credit for her being an editor of her work, Ellen White would make her feel guilty about it and say, it's just pride. It's all pride. You are proud about the fact, and you are just trying to make yourself look like something. And so she felt intimidated by Ellen White. And there was all the way through this experience, if you read the history of it, of the story of Fanny Bolton, 4 times she left the employment of Ellen White. She came back. In fact, she came back the final time. So she left 3 times and came back the 4th time and then finally left. But every time she came back, Ellen White made her feel guilty that she was wanting to have some sort of glory for herself because of what the work that she was doing, and kept on emphasizing the point that this is work that comes from God. These are things which don't need to be dealt with in the same way as one is dealing with them in the mainstream publishing industry. So she was continually, and by the time she reached the end of these 4 years, with all the guilt that was thrown on her by Ellen White, it is not surprising that she actually ended up in an institution and had the kinds of psychological problems that she had.
Plus,
because
she was in a vulnerable position because she's a young, single woman. She doesn't have a husband that she can go to and that can kind of help her understand or back her up on anything. So she's in a vulnerable position anyway. And she's also highly conscientious, and her conscience was bothering her about the things that she was doing because she felt like it wasn't right. But then you've got this person who she did believe was a prophet of God, and so she's dealing with, she's like that between a rock and a hard place.
She was in conflict. She was torn between those two concepts. In fact, she states that herself in what she says. She was torn between this person being a prophet doing this work for God, and then the literary maxims that were out there that needed to be adhered to. She was continually fluctuating. Well, should I actually make a deal? And then she did make a big deal out of it, but then she was made to feel guilty about it again. And so she was continually being torn between. But I think the big problem is not only did she witness that, I mean, she witnessed Ellen White herself not living up to the instructions which she was giving, like seeing Ellen White eating oysters behind a screen in a restaurant and lying about that, the bloody beefsteak story and all of that. I think we sort of spoke about that a little bit when we spoke about the meat eating. So she knew that Ellen White was not living up to this. So she was almost wondering, and she makes this comment as well, she was almost wondering, is there really maybe a different standard that is there for somebody who is a prophet, a person called by God to be a prophet? And is this also in their life and also in how they approach the whole idea of writing and sharing the truth, as opposed to what is actually acceptable in the literary world out there? She was taught, and I mean, it's anything like this can eventually make you go nuts when you are dealing with something like this, and then you are made to feel guilty about speaking out about it, because Ellen White said really very strong, hurtful things about Fanny Bolton that apparently God had shown her. Fanny Bolton is your enemy. She was pretty much the servant of Satan as far as God had revealed to Ellen White, according to Ellen White's claim. So she was really getting it from all sides, her own conscience bothering her, these two things she was torn between, and then the contradictory things Ellen White was doing, and then Ellen White telling her that she was actually a servant of Satan. I mean, that's a lot of baggage to carry around.
She kind of drove her to her early grave.
Yeah, right.
Sure, I'm convinced that the evidence in the story, and by the way, those of you that are watching, I mean, you can find all of this in the White Elephant, the entire chapter.
That's right.
This is chapter 7, but you can also read, if you go to the White Estate, you can read the Fanny Bolton story. I mean, don't just read this. A lot of these quotes are actually quotes that you can find even on the White Estate. I'm going to put on the screen in just a second. This is actually from page 171. And I don't know actually where because you said that she was kind of hired and fired 3 or 4 times. I don't know exactly if this is her first or second. I don't know where this all was in the sequence. But I want to put on the screen this just to show the audience the level of, I've got arrogance, okay? The level of spiritual arrogance coming from the pen of Ellen White, okay? This is, and I apologize, the top part's a little blurry. I snapped a picture and I'm sharing the picture here. But this is Ellen White's attack and defense strategy. And she writes on February 6, 1894, Ellen White wrote the following. Now, my sister, I do not want you to be any longer connected with me in my work. This is after Fanny had told them that listen, you're copying things. You're making me do things that I don't want to do. But I mean now for your good that you should never have another opportunity to do as you have done in the past. The only reference Ellen made to that letter to the matter of her copying from other authors was this, and I've got it highlighted here. Should I attempt to vindicate my course to those who do not appreciate the spiritual character of the work which is laid upon me, it would only expose myself and the work of conception and misrepresentation. To present the matter before other minds would be useless, for there are but few who are really so connected with God, see beneath the surface appearance as to understand it. This work is one that I cannot explain. So I just wrote here, wow, complete arrogance. I mean, she was so kind of in love with her own work that she she was like, you wouldn't understand, other people wouldn't understand. Um, they just wouldn't get how spiritually, close I am to God. And so I can justify the things that I'm doing. And then you write in the next paragraph down, Fanny knew that Mrs. White was copying other authors without giving credit. And today, based on in-depth research and extensive comparison, this fact is beyond debate.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, where do you want to go with that?
Yeah, I'm just going to mention, this was right near the end. This was like on the fourth occasion. This was like where Ellen White was apparently done with Fanny Bolton. So that's kind of the historical context of the whole story. But so basically where I want to go with this is that, first of all, this kind of thing, because as we were saying, sorry, just by the way, if people saw moving around, my battery was showing me that I had no more battery life, so I had to find a place to plug it in. So that's why I was moving around while you were speaking to get it plugged in. But yes, so this makes the point with those kinds of things being said about you by somebody, because bear in mind, like Cami emphasized as well, Fanny Bolton really did believe that she was working with somebody who was a prophet of God. But she was also struggling with what she knew to be the truth and the contradictions that she saw. So with this kind of thing going on, and with this kind of intimidation, like through these kinds of statements made by Ellen White, it makes the point that we were making earlier on. And that is that this eventually destroyed Fanny Bolton, because she in one part, you will read this in the book. It's in the book in the White Elephant. She actually makes a statement, and I'm just ad-libbing, it's not word for word what she said. But she said that she wanted to stay close to Ellen White. She wanted to work for her because she felt that her salvation was connected to her actually being a part of this work that Ellen White was doing. So she had reached the point in her and made her feel this way, that if you actually leave and you are disconnected from this, you might not even be saved. With that kind of baggage, like I said earlier, carrying that kind of baggage must have a very powerful effect on a person. And by the way, in spite of that, it does not negate what, and this is because we are talking about plagiarism here, her statements about it, and even the fact that Ellen White may have said stuff like this, does not negate the fact that Ellen White plagiarized, that Fanny Bolton was 100% right about what the laws of the land were, about what was actually acceptable when you are publishing a book, and all these things. She was right about that. So who cares? I mean, I'm not saying that to be flippant, but who cares about all the rest? All the rest is window dressing. The fact of the matter is that she was 100% right about the fact that Ellen White plagiarized. Even if she was the devil herself or himself, she's still right that Ellen White plagiarized. So, and that's the bottom line. Fanny Bolton was 100% right that she took writings from other people. She did not give credit for this. And this was what she was struggling with. And you can knock that horse 10 different directions if you want to. The fact remains is that is the truth. And so, and as I said earlier, this is why we don't need Fanny Bolton to prove that. She just substantiated. But what's substantiated, but what makes it important with Fanny Bolton, what makes it so poignant, if you like, is that here is a person whose life was literally destroyed because she dared to stand up and speak out against a prophet of God who was actually living a lie, telling a lie, and who was not willing to come clean on what was actually happening. That is what makes Fanny Bolton's story so vitally important.
Well, and I think it proves a little bit of a I've said this early on when we left, the attitude that we got from people that are deep in the Adventist culture was no different than the attitude that their prophetess taught the early followers to treat other people. I mean, this is the way, if you're not a part of the remnant, if you're not a part of the team, and you're a part of the outside group, then especially if they speak out, especially if they claim we're doing something wrong, it's okay to destroy them. It's okay to go after them. It's okay to call them. I mean, I'm just going to put this on the screen.
Treat them with contempt.
This is what what Ellen White claimed. Now, again, she's claiming, this is page 175 of your book, okay?
Right.
She's claiming right here in the highlight, Ellen said that she had been told by a, quote, unseen presence on March 20, 1895, that Fanny was to be taken back into the work. If she separated now from you, said the Spirit, here we go, Satan's net is prepared for her feet. She's not in the condition to be left to herself now, to be consumed of herself. She feels regret and remorse. I am her Redeemer.
Yeah.
I will restore her if she will not exalt and honor and glorify herself. So this is all like, if she, again, this is all like Fanny Bolton, like doing everything for herself. Right. She wants glory. Take her back. If she goes from you now, there is a chain of circumstances that will bring her into difficulties, which will be her ruin. Well, that is prophetically true, because she went into a psycho house.
Yeah, that was the final straw, was those types of things, because that was right at the very final time that Fanny Bolton ever worked for Ellen White. And then after that, she just deteriorated, and as you say, finally ended up in an institution.
And notice what the next paragraph says. And it says, in 1900, Ellen White, Ellen wrote to Irwin, giving the reason for asking Fanny back a fourth time. Just notice the arrogance in here, okay? I now see why I was directed to give Fanny another trial.
Right.
It's like she was the one being told to, like, oh, you're supposed to give her this challenge. Oh, you're supposed to see if she breaks or not.
Yeah,
there are those
Redeemer, you know?
because of Fanny's misrepresentations. These were watching to see what course I would take in regard to her. They would have represented that I have abused poor Fanny Bolton in following the directions to take her back. I took away all occasions for criticism from those who were ready to condemn me. She always paints herself in this perfect light, that everything's great. I did everything right. It's just crazy. I mean, I would go crazy if this woman attacked me like that.
Just another case in point, another statement Ellen White made as well, was with regards to Fanny Bolton. She says, I will cut off the influence of your tongue in every way that I can. I mean, when somebody says something to you, it's hurtful, but when you consider all the things that Fanny Bolton was struggling with regards to which we've already mentioned, you can imagine how things like that must have really cut her when Ellen White said stuff like that.
I mean, it's very much the ends justifies the means. You know, I will do whatever necessary to cut you off. If you do me wrong, I'm going to do. That just isn't
I will destroy you. You know.
Yeah, that's not the fruit of the Spirit.
No. No, because you see, there was no way that Ellen White could defend it. I'm sure that Ellen White knew that probably some point in the future, somebody's going to find out about all the plagiarism and stuff that I did. And that was the honest truth that Fanny was telling. And the only way for her to deal with it at the time is just to really paint Fanny as black as she possibly could.
It's so sad. It's unfortunate. And again, to your original statement, it isn't that we need, again, this is a conversation about plagiarism, about literary theft, about literary borrowing. It isn't that we need Fanny Bolton, okay? It isn't that we need Canwright. It isn't that we need, again, don't be led by an SDA apologist to think that, like, oh, if I get this off the hook, this is the same thing that the guy in the video in the very beginning, like, oh, well, we already hired an attorney. Silly you all. We hired an attorney and we already know this stuff, and like, we're good. Our hands are clean. If you're told that, you don't need any one of these things. These are all pieces of evidence that, when put together, put a very strong case together that not only did she lie about her writing, she was a hypocrite, she was a literary theft. She was, I believe, controlled by demonic spirits. I think her spirit guide was probably not of God. It was a different spirit guide. I don't know. That could be. Who knows? Yeah. So, so as we finish this out on Fanny, That sounds a little odd. As we finish this out on Fanny, because nowadays people call a Fanny something else. We're
Yeah.
not talking about we're talking about Fanny Bolton here. But Cammie, what would you add to this conversation with regards to Fanny Bolton? And then I want to end with a few final statements from your chapter.
Well, I guess I feel like that really what our ministry is about, what Brian and I, why we wrote the book, why we write any of the books that we write, is because we believe that God is calling us to really bring unity to people. And the unity comes from when we stop dividing ourselves into these separate denominations and into this group or that group, because we have this unique belief that we think is very important. And then we just think that if you really want to believe the truth, you have to believe this specific way about these things. We think that God is calling us into maturity from that. We're like little children on this planet, and we all think and act like we're following God, when actually we are just trying to have our own ideas about things, and we're not honing into the gospel of what God really called us to do. And so Ephesians 4 is what we think is a really important call to unity, to, one baptism, one God, one faith. And also in that chapter, it talks about new creation. And that's why we call it new creation ministry, is because we believe that God is wanting us to become new creatures in him, new creatures in Christ. And so, whether it's dealing with issues, very, very specific, particular issues, we're dealing with people. Fanny Bolton was a person. Ellen White was a person. All these people that we are talking about are people, and they're all children of God that God loves. But sometimes we get off track, and so it's just, I guess it's one of those things that we need to be forgiving. And I don't even, I'm not saying that Ellen White is going to go to hell because she's a false prophet. That's between her and God. What Fanny Bolton's, situation, that's, in her conscience, we can look at her actions and things, and we can see from our own perspective what we think was happening, or like you said, what we think was going on in her mind. But really, at the bottom line is, it's between her and God. And each of us is going to have to give an account of ourselves to God as an individual. So breaking us away from our thoughts of we have to belong to these certain churches so that we can have salvation. It doesn't matter, what that denomination is. The bottom line is things are between us and God. And that's what we believe is so important, and why we don't belong to a denomination anymore. We believe we are part of the Christian church.
Yeah, and I just add, this was in Fanny Bolton's case. She's in fact a perfect case in point, where and there are so many people in the church today who, because of guilt and because of pressure and because of made to feel that if you get out of this, you've got nowhere else to go. Fanny Bolton is a prime case in point that shows that this is what can happen to you at the end when you are guilted into staying in a place like with her and Ellen White, and then staying in the Adventist church and finally losing her mind because of it. When you are guilted into staying in a particular place, instead of realizing that the whole concept of Christianity, of eternal life, of conversion is far broader than this little narrow thing, this bubble that you're locked into called the Adventist church, whatever denomination it might be, by the way.
Right.
It is not a church. And I know I've said this in every interview. We are not saved by a denomination. We are saved through a person, and that person is Jesus Christ. I don't give a darn what denomination you belong to. If you don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, and if that's not the basis for your salvation, you've got nothing. So Fanny Bolton ended up finding herself in a position where she became tied to Ellen White and the Adventist church, and it really destroyed her in the end.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a great segue. This is near the end of your chapter. And I've just highlighted a little bit. You can kind of read, in 1911, when Fanny was 52 years old, her emotional health broke and she was admitted to the Kalamazoo State Hospital. She was released after 13 months. That's a long time, less than 2 years before she died. She was admitted again for 3 weeks. To Fanny's detractors, this was an indication that divine retribution was being meted out in the here and now, and positive proof that she had been unbalanced all along. But the next
retribution, that's what it was.
Yep. Fanny was heard from off and on during the years following her employment with Ellen. As late as 1914, she wrote, quote, "I was with Mrs. White for 7.5 years like a soul on a rock because of all kinds of inconsistencies, injustices, and chicaneries. Fanny died in 1926 at Battle Creek, according to the review, June 28. So it is
sorry, but there in a nutshell, she's actually saying, through the chicaneries and all these things that were going on, she's actually revealing that she was being deceived and she was stuck to this and she was in conflict. That's exactly what she was revealing through those statements.
Yeah, and my heart does go out to her because I can understand again, I'm a third, fifth generation. I was a third, fifth generation Adventist. Like it was emotionally challenging for my wife and I to leave a church that our entire family was built on.
Right.
It almost cost my wife her life. I mean, she had health issues, she had anxiety, she had all kinds of issues going on, that it wasn't until we had kind of started moving out of the church that her body began to heal, and the emotional trauma and the spiritual weight and all the stuff that comes along,
right?
All of this. So my heart goes out to Fanny, and I wish that Adventist apologists would be honest about her statements and let her story be what it is.
Right.
Any other thoughts on Fanny as we kind of, I know that we're getting almost to the 2-hour mark here, but any other thoughts on Fanny Bolton?
Well, not really specifically. All I would say is that anybody and it's more of a lesson. Fanny Bolton is a lesson book for people in the Adventist church. She's a lesson book in the sense that when you get so caught up in one particular denomination, one particular line of teaching, doctrines, whatever you want to say, whatever you want to call it, you can lose the bigger picture of what real, true Christianity is all about. And when you find yourself in that kind of bubble, you end up in a cult. You don't have to call it a cult, but that's really what it's a cult type of mindset. And so and Fanny Bolton was a prime example of what happens when you get sucked into that bubble, and then you are made to feel that if I leave this bubble, I'm done. I will never have eternal life, or God might reject me, or whatever the case may be. So that is for me. Besides the tragedy of Fanny Bolton's life, the tragedy is, in the broader spiritual sense, the tragedy is that she got sucked into a bubble and she never got out of that bubble, and because of that, she literally actually lost her mind.
Yeah. The last part of this this picture here, I have to point it out. Ironically, her death certificate gives her occupation as, quote, letter writer, the part of her work for Ellen that she disliked the very most.
And that was because she actually stated, she said the personal letters Ellen White wrote to people about their personal lives and revealing things and really speaking out against people's sins and whatever, and making it public. She said that those were the things that she really felt objectionable in the writings of Ellen White.
Yeah. And some may know this that are watching. You may not, if this is new to you, but many of those letters, I think that the big issue with Fanny is she like she would write some of this stuff, and then it would be handed off. Ellen White would send them off and say, "Hey, this came from God."
Yeah.
And her big question, her big mental conflict was, wait a second, I know that came from my pen. I know that this is my writing, and now it's in the newspaper, and now it's in someone else's hand, and they think it's directly from Ellen White, from the throne room of God. That's wrong. And so that's why, this whole she hated the idea that she was the letter writer, because
that absolutely is right. Yeah.
So I see Cammie looking for something in the book. I see her trying to.
It's a Bible. She's got a Bible.
No, I was just looking.
I
was just looking at Ephesians 4, and how Paul just really calls us to unity, and I think that we everything that we do should be in the spirit of unity. And I don't want people to think that we're trying to divide, because that's not our mission. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to unify Christians and truth all over the world, every denomination, to unify people into the gospel message of Jesus, because that is the only thing that saves us. And we don't want people to look at us like we are Adventist haters or Ellen White haters or anything like that, or that we're trying to attack anyone. We just really want to do God's calling to us, which is unity. And Ephesians chapter 4, verse 4 says, "There is one body and one spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all." And that's what we really want to emphasize, is just the call to unity in faith in Christ.
The two key words of there is one and all. It's not one and this group or that. It's one truth, but it is for all. It is for everybody, and we need to really understand that is only found through Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and a couple of thoughts on that. I love that you're bringing this up. Yes, we as the church are called to unity. Two thoughts come to mind. Those that come into the church that seek to deceive are causing disunity. Yes. Part of the reason why, not only us, but the early apostles spoke a lot about false teachers and false speakers, preachers, all that stuff. Because deception causes disunity within the body of believers. Secondly, what's really interesting is that Jesus Christ himself came not to unite, but to divide. He even said, I come to divide. Now, that's what's interesting. It isn't, you and I are not supposed to be dividers.
No.
We're supposed to unite. But Christ, which is through the gospel divides people.
The truth.
It is what it is.
The truth from that which is false. That's right.
Yes. And when we say truth, I used to think that was the Adventist truth.
Yeah.
It's Jesus.
Yeah.
It's the gospel. It's
the way, the truth.
The way, the truth, and the life. And when Paul speaks about unity, he's speaking about unity in the truth.
In Jesus.
And that's what God is calling all people to be united in one body, but a body of truth, not a body that is filled with deception and lies.
Yeah, there's no reason in the world for us to be divided over Ellen White when Jesus is who we are all wanting to follow. Jesus is the way, the truth, life. So if we believe in Jesus, we put our faith in him, then that's all that we really need to worry about, right? So Ellen White, we don't put our faith in Ellen White, as we don't put our faith in any prophet. We put our faith in Jesus.
Yep. No, totally agree. And as we exit out, I just want to give the audience, listen, if you're watching and you're an Adventist thinking about or questioning, or maybe you're a devout Ellen White follower, my appeal to you all watching is put your faith solely in Christ, as Brian and Cammie have been saying. Put your faith in Christ. Allow yourself to test the Spirit. That's what we're called to do. That's what we're doing here with Ellen White. Test those that claim to call through the name of God, claim to speak on his behalf. We are called to test. And this conversation is one of many that just proves that she spoke presumptuously. She is that's the reason why we call her a false prophet, false prophetess. The Old Testament talks about that. Anyone who speaks things that do not come true, speaks things that are not from me, then they're speaking presumptuously. And you should not be afraid of them.
That's
Right.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely.
All right, friends. Anything else you want to add as we exit out? I want to honor your time. I know that we've already.
No problem. I just want to say that anybody who does want the book, The White Elephant, you can get it at Amazon. It's available on Amazon, both in hardcover and also in the Kindle version of the book. So just go on Amazon, type in White Elephant in Seventh-day Adventism. It's there. But I also want to say, if you really don't have the means to get the book, The White Elephant, and you just can't afford it, or whatever the case is, send me an email, crackscreationsproductions@gmail.com, all one word, lowercase, and I will be happy to send you a copy.
PDF.
Yeah,
A
I
PDF.
appreciate
It will be a PDF copy of this, but not a hardcover. There would be postage and everything else. But yes, I can email you a PDF copy. But it is available. Must be honest, most people that have read it appreciate having a hard copy because it's something you can underline.
Make notes.
I'm old school, so I like hard copies. But I nevertheless am willing to do that.
Yeah, for those, I really appreciate that. If any of you didn't catch the email, I'll just mention this because I didn't write it down. If you all want to connect, you're welcome to connect with me. I can put you in touch with Brian and Cammie. I know that Brian was very kind, shared the PDF with me as well, even though I already obviously do have the book itself. But please do your own. We say this every time. Do your own research. Don't take Brian, Cammie. Don't take their word for it. Go get the book, read it, test what they have to say. Do the research yourself. You need to know in your own mind whether or not this woman was a prophet of God or not. And don't take your pastor's word for it. Don't take your elder's word for it. Don't take anyone else's word for it. Test to see if they are true or not. That is what we're all about at the Thinking Cup. And I know the Newmans are all about that as well. Absolutely. All right. Well, we're getting lots of positive feedback. A lot of thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up. I'm just going to put some of these on the screen here. I appreciate it. Great discussion. Thank you, Mike and Mr. and Mrs. Newman. I always feel weird when people call me Mr. and Mrs. Colburn, but it's all,
totally
good.
I'm totally weirded out. I don't know what to do. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
We'll just edit that and say Brian and Cammie. How's that?
No,
that's fine.
Mrs. Newman is just
fine. It's fine. I'm just putting whoever it was. It's perfectly fine.
I love it. And then we'll end with this. Scotty says, only Jesus. And I absolutely love that. Friends, thank you so much for the conversation tonight. Again, as always, I hope that we'll have you back. I know we've had several already. There is way more that we can talk about in this book, along with, I know that Brian has written many other books as well. So who knows, you might see. Yep, Brian and Cammie, both of you have written, I love it, have written many books. And so would love to have you back and discuss more. So thank you again, friends. We are grateful for all of you watching. Please, please, please subscribe, hit that notification bar so that you can get notified for the next one. We have my next series this week is coming out probably Thursday, the next part 4 of the Spirit of Hypocrisy. If you don't know what it is, well, go check out the previous 3. So hopefully we'll have you there. Be blessed. We'll see you next time and have a fabulous night.